Hello, I just want to say that this episode was going to be about the whole Miriblisk system, but as I kind of expected, the script was too long to make an episode that would come out in a reasonable amount of time. Because of that, this episode, episode 7, it's just going to be about the inner Miriblisk system, meaning everything with orbits interior of the gas giant's orbits. Episode 8 will be about the outer part. Enjoy! Briskellanya's planetary system, the Miriblisk system, is a solar system not much unlike our own. It has a few small rocky planets on the inside of the system, then large gas giants, though the Miriblisk system has the oddity that is Uniatas, and finally a few tiny icy dwarf planets. Solar systems so similar to our own are actually pretty rare in real life, but that doesn't mean we are one in a kind. In this episode, and the next one, I will discuss Miriblisk and the 12 planetary mass objects directly orbiting it. Blizan, Briskillanya, Aronev, Sotirdya, Sieret, Hubre, Uniatas, Jinpra, Amat, Ezin, Frij, and Fichta, as well as a few notable moons. This one will be about the first 5 and their moons. Miriblisk is a G3V type star on the outskirts of the Scutus Centaurus arm of the Milky Way, which orbits around 28,800 light-years from the galactic center. Its mass is around 98.98% that of our Sun. Miriblisk's region of the galaxy is like ours, not too densely populated by stars, which would eat up all the resources for planetary formation, make the likelihood of any planet being sterilized or even destroyed by a supernova or similar event rise, but not too diffusely either, which would make materials necessary for the formation of planets too diffusely spread. If you were to judge Miriblisk without consideration of what orbits it, you would be justified in calling the star fairly uninteresting. Sun-like stars are not really exceptionally uncommon. Putting into consideration what's around the star, this reaction is less justifiable. Miriblisk, of course, is the undisputed brightest object in Briskellanya's sky. Miriblisk and its system were formed by the collapse of a large interstellar molecular cloud around 4.51 billion years ago, around the same time our system was formed. Now, because I've said basically everything there is to say about Miriblisk, I'll move on to the other 0.1% of the Miriblisk system's mass. Miriblisk's first planet is called Blizan, which is a hot, dry, and airless terrestrial planet. Mostly composed of silicate rock with an iron core, the world is a heavily cratered one with a brownish-orange color, along with large maria like those in our moon. Blizan is rather similar to our Mars in size, a 6,033 km diameter, mass, 0.0815 Earth masses, in composition, but is also like Mercury due to its orbital position, temperature, and near complete lack of atmosphere. However, Blizan's daytime temperature is more mild than Mercury's because of Blizan's greater summit-major axis. Similar to Mercury and our moon, Blizan's night side is very cold because of the lack of atmosphere to circulate heat. Blizan orbits Miriblisk at an average distance of 0.5543 astronomical units with an eccentricity of 0.03 and an inclination of 3 degrees. Due to the apparent golden color of Blizan, it has gained associations with wealth, and by extension plenty, food, and generosity in many cultures on its outer neighbor. Because of its small size and relative proximity to Miriblisk, the same factors that led to Blizan never gaining an atmosphere, Blizan is sadly moonless. Briskillanya does not require much of an introduction. The only world in the system to have complex life, Briskillanya's axial tilt is 15 degrees, usually giving it milder seasons than Earth. Briskillanya has 3 moons, Hristi, Letrobriskin, and Hubre. If you want to know more about Briskillanya, the other 6 episodes will suffice. Also, its orbit's eccentricity is 0.007. Hristi is the largest moon of Briskillanya, and the planet's only major moon. Hristi is a lot like our own moon, except a bit smaller, 3,257 kilometers as compared to our moon's 3,474 kilometers, and less massive, 0.010 Earth masses, or 0.8099 lunar masses. Hristi and Letrobriskin were formed in a massive collision early in Briskillanya's history that launched massive amounts of debris into space that coalesced into the moons after Briskillanya was hit by a smaller developing planet. This is much like how our moon was formed. Hristi is tightly locked, and the face it presents to Briskillanya has a few prominent maria scattered around, as well as a number of prominent ray craters. The far side is similar, though with larger, less haphazardly spread maria. Hristi's orbit, and by extension Letrobriskin's, has a semi-major axis of 358,645 kilometers and an eccentricity of 0.03. As the second brightest object in Briskillanya's sky, Literally every documented culture on the planet had some type of relationship with the big pretty skyrock. For example, it was essential for telling time in the warm tropical civilizations like Hyania, Sidene, and Regla, as well as in the very cold ones like Azer, Tetrabina, and Hyania, as the rarely changing climates in those places historically made Miribliskian calendars inefficient. Letrobriskin is Briskillanya's smallest moon, and it shares the title of closest moon to Briskillanya of Hristi. Letrobriskin is 250 kilometers at its longest diameter, scratching the upper size bound for minor moons. Letrobriskin was formed in the same collision that created its larger sibling, which led to it sharing Hristi's orbit and lying in the larger moon's L5 point. Letrobriskin has a very distinctive red color from iron oxide-based regolith covering its surface, as most of the iron sent into Briskillanyan orbit after the collision just happened to coalesce onto the newborn Letrobriskin, which was too small to develop differentiated layers. The iron is later powderized by impacts and oxidized by billions of years of interacting with the tenuous outer layers of the Briskillanyan exosphere. Like Hristi, Letrobriskin is tightly locked to its parent world. For Briskillanya, Letrobriskin's color is distinctly visible, and the moon's apparent diameter is large enough to be a discernible but tiny disk. It always appears in the same location relative to Hristi. This leads to it having connotations of loyalty and subservience in many places, most notably Hyania's. The moon's bright red color also gave it negative associations with violence in Hyanttia and eastern Aberdeen. Hubre is the final and second largest moon of Briskillanya. Hubre is only a bit larger than Letrobriskin at 262 kilometers at its longest diameter. It orbits in an eccentric and inclined path in the outer reaches of Briskillanya's hill spear, far past the other two moons. Unlike the two inner moons, it did not naturally form around Briskillanya, it actually formed in an orbit around Miriblisk, very near Briskillanya's orbit, and then it was captured by Briskillanya's gravity with the help of gravitational tugging by the other planets. Hubre itself is a dark gray asteroid-like world covered in iron-rich basalt, the same material that makes up the Hristi and Mario. Hubre is an average of 784,555 kilometers from its parent world and has an eccentricity of 0.12 and an inclination of 9 degrees. From Briskillanya, Hubre varies in size quite a bit, sometimes being large enough to appear as a tiny but discernible disk, but usually just appearing as a bright point. Because of Hubre's 9-degree inclination, it can easily be observed drifting above the plane of the planets, the other moons, and Miriblisk. Because of these unusual qualities, Hubre is associated with lawlessness, inconsistency, blindness, and rebellion. While Earth is the largest solid world in our solar system, Briskillanya is only the second largest in its system. Its outer neighbor, Aronev, has the distinction of being its system's largest terrestrial world, as it's even a bit larger than our own planet at 13,394 kilometers in diameter, and a bit more massive at 1.1535 Earth masses, or about 2.5 Briskillanya masses. Like Briskillanya, Aronev is an Earth-like habitable world of a breathable nitrogen-oxygen atmosphere and expansive oceans of salty liquid water. In fact, Aronev also has life, but only in the form of marine unicellular prokaryotes, many photosynthetic and the rest chemosynthetic and living around hydrothermal vents at the bottom of the Aronevi oceans. The tiny photosynthetic organisms contribute to the planet's friendly atmosphere. Aronev's life developed later than Briskillanya's, only appearing around 1 billion years ago. Briskillanyan life has been around for slightly over 3 billion years. The chemosynthetic organisms at the bottom of the oceans were the first ones to develop, and then the photosynthetic ones evolved from them. Aronev is, of course, colder than its inner sibling, giving the planet large ice caps. The temperature is still not too cold, and a human could hypothetically survive on Aronev as long as they bring a jacket. The Aronevi continents are still lifeless, mostly being composed of deserts and beaches made out of sand and exposed rock. Aronev, like Earth and Briskillanya, is geologically active and has plate tectonics and a rather strong magnetic field. Aronev's semi-major axis is 1.4451 AU, its eccentricity is 0.02, and its inclination is half a degree. Aronev's obliquity is 31 degrees, giving it seasons that are easily visible through Briskillanya-based amateur telescopes. Speaking of how Aronev is viewed from Briskillanya, it appears as a remarkably bright star when close, and in opposition, it is close enough for large continents to be visible through a good pair of binoculars. Because of how big and bright it often appears from Briskillanya, it is associated with concepts like beauty, elegance, and power. Aronev has a system of 3 moons, all of which are minor. Aronev's 3 moons are called Neft, Uj, and Elnekburi. Neft is the largest, at 41 kilometers across, and the only one that's native to the Aronev system, evidenced by its close-in, circular, and equatorial orbit. Uj and Olnekburi are two captured asteroids about 10 kilometers across each that orbit far from Aronev on inclined eccentric orbits. All three were discovered by Briskillanyans only around 30 years ago. The next Miribliskian planet is the fourth one, Sotirdya, which in many ways is comparable to Mars. A cold, thin-atmosphered red desert world, Sotirdya is slightly larger than Mars, 7,809 kilometers in diameter and 0.168 Earth masses, giving it a thicker but still thin atmosphere. Unlike our friendly neighborhood bringer of war, Sotirdya was never a habitable world, as its water was already frozen. Sotirdya noticeably has a paler color than Mars, and this is due to silica sand being mixed in with the iron oxide dust that covers the planet. Sotirdya orbits at an average of 1.703 AU for Miriblisk, its eccentricity is 0.04, and its inclination is 2 degrees. For Briskillanya, Sotirdya appears as a fairly bright reddish point that varies greatly in brightness, much like how Mars appears from Earth. Sotirdya is associated with traits like balance, justice, compromise, and fairness. Sotirdya has a single major moon, Winleis. Winleis is Sotirdya's only moon. At 403 kilometers in diameter, it is just barely spherical and has a mass of 1.068 times 10 to the 20 kilograms, or 0.0015 lunar masses. It formed in a less extreme version of an Earth-Theia type collision. This moon has a very dark color owing to the surface's carbon-rich composition. Winleis' semi-major axis is 208,703 kilometers, its eccentricity is 0.08, and its inclination is 0.3 degrees. Winleis was one of the first objects to be discovered through a telescope. The fifth and final terrestrial planet in the Miriblisk system is Sieret, which is also a cold red desert planet like Sotirdya and Mars are. However, it's smaller than the other two, and it is the second smallest terrestrial planet in the system, with a diameter of 6,148 kilometers and a mass of 0.0843 Earth masses. Sieret is a very unusual planet for many reasons. First, while the other Miribliskian terrestrial planets orbit in nearly circular, albeit unusually spaced orbits that only differ in inclination by at most 3 degrees, Sieret orbits in an elliptical path with an inclination of 10 degrees. This orbit is so elliptical that Sieret is 73.9% further from Miriblisk at its apoapsis as it is at its periapsis. It is also tilted on its axis by 53 degrees, which gives the planet extreme chaotic seasons, especially when compounded by its irregular orbit. During the Sieretian summer in a given hemisphere, that hemisphere's ice cap can shrink to near non-existence. The winters are even more intense. The ice caps can nearly reach the equator. These strange features point to the possibility that Sieret suffered some great impact and a gravitational push from Hubre in the distant past. Sieret's surface is also a place of extremes, containing Olympus Mons-esque dormant volcanoes that nearly penetrate the outer edges of the planet's tenuous atmosphere, evidence of Sieret's now long dead geological activity. Unlike Sieret and like Mars, Sieret used to have liquid water, but Sieret's water went away very quickly. Sieret's semi-major axis is 2.91 astronomical units, and its eccentricity is 0.27. On Briskillanya, Sieret's tiny size and distant orbit for a terrestrial planet sometimes make it invisible to the naked eye, but is often visible as a deep red star hanging above or below the planetary plane, as Hubre does. This, perhaps unsurprisingly, gives it associations of chaos, madness, and revolution. These associations were only reinforced when Sieret's extreme seasons were telescopically discovered. Sieret has 2 minor moons orbiting it. Sieret's 2 small moons, Sirmi and Yater, are quite different from one another. Sirmi is about 106 kilometers across, and it orbits in a close-in, hugging the Roche limit in fact, nearly circular equatorial orbit, giving evidence that this moon formed around its host planet out of the debris of the collision that gave Sieret its tilt. Due to a chaotic, impact-heavy formation, Sirmi has regions of strongly contrasting colors from the multitude of materials that cover it. The other, Yater, is a captured asteroid, shown by its far-flung retrograde orbit with a large degree of inclination. Yater is tiny in size, at only 4 kilometers across, which is why Briskillanyans are yet to discover it. Past the lopsided orbit of Sieret is the Miriblisk system's asteroid belt, called the Yad Belt after the person who discovered a few of its first known members. It stretches from 4.56 to 5.3 AAU. The Yad Belt is not as wide or massive as our own asteroid belt because the Miriblisk system's main gas giant, Hubre, formed further out than our Jupiter did, allowing the inner planets to use up more of the region's rocky material. Much like our own solar system's asteroid belt, it is composed of rocks left over from the planet's formation. Just for fun, here are some size comparisons involving the worlds of the inner Miriblisk system. That's all for this episode, and I hope that you liked watching it. The next episode will be about everything past the Yad Belt. As I have already said, I already have that part written. Goodbye!